It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, how we doing?
I'm doing good. Feeling good. Got the music going. I'm pumped up. I'm ready to talk about some football on a Wednesday, hump day. Let's get over it. Let's get to it.
Let's get over it. You mentioned, I mentioned right before we started recording, I just feel so drained from what I do for my other job. I literally talk to basically every single customer that our store has. So Alan said I brought the juice yesterday. Maybe hearing that music, it did get me rejuvenated a little bit, but I'm going to need some extra vibes, I feel like, from Alan throughout this episode. But Alan, we've been working on at the site a power rankings of the AFC North by position, if you will. We've already put out the QB and running backs, wide receivers set to come out over this weekend, but we haven't talked about these rankings on here at all. You, myself, Derek Bell, the ones that are collaborating on this project, and I thought it'd be fun to kind of converse over, what we've put together so far through these power rankings and see, obviously, where the Steelers stack up compared to the rest of the division.
Yeah, I think it's really important when you look at the Steelers' schedule. I mean, we talked about how those backloaded games are going to be important. We've talked about how the Steelers have done really well against the division. They've been one of the best team. They've been the best team in the AFC North amongst, in terms of in-division record for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years. They're going to have to be that again this year if they want to compete with that stretch run of the schedule. But I think it's going to be very difficult. It's a really talented division. Joe Burrow is going to be back this year. We've got. I mean, I saw you can make a pretty good argument. Like Lamar Jackson was the MVP last year.
Mm-hmm.
Myles Garrett was the defensive player of the year. I think, our stance on who should have won that is pretty clear. Like, you can make a pretty good argument, like 3 of the best 5 players in the NFL or in the AFC North, like just overall football players. I mean, you got to put Pat Mahomes in that conversation,
Sure.
But like, it's a very difficult division.
I would say, even if you replace the word best with valuable, because I think that those might be 2 different conversations. I think that I could definitely get on board with that because of the quarterback position obviously being so important in the guys at the top 2. Again, I think, kind of the way that the Steelers fans view Lamar Jackson because of their ability to limit him so far in their matchups has maybe skewed their opinion of him compared to what he does against literally everybody else. But you did have Joe Burrow as your number 1 in the division. Derek and I had Lamar Jackson ahead of him. You go, and we can talk about these each a little bit more, but then we were basically on the same page throughout. I did have Jameis Winston a little bit higher than you guys. I actually wrote the blurb about him for the power rankings. But where do you want to start with this? Do you want to start at the top?
Let's start with the top, and let's start with quarterbacks. I think that's Lamar Jackson is the reigning MVP, and it's silly to not put him at the top, but I did not, because I think if you had to, honestly, if you want to go into the season, you want to pick one of those quarterbacks to have. I mean, Lamar's been great, but he hasn't gotten them to where they want to go either. I don't know. I think give me Joe Burrow.
I can see the argument either way. And not to say Joe Burrow, I think Joe Burrow might be a little bit underrated in terms of his athleticism and stuff that he can do outside of the pocket. And to know that Lamar, even, isn't the Lamar of 2 years ago in terms of his mobility. Injuries, I think, have clearly hampered him where he's not maybe the best in terms of that anymore. Obviously, maybe the best is sitting behind Russell Wilson right now in Pittsburgh in terms of that type of stuff. But I just look at what the dynamic player that Lamar is. I think that he's done as much or more, obviously not with the playoff success, but with the production that he's had with less than what he's had around him on the offensive side of the football than Joe Burrow, obviously having Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator. Now, last year when he got Todd Monken, I'm curious to see what that marriage looks like going forward with Monken obviously not being one and done. I was kind of crossing my fingers that would happen. But no, I don't think that you can go wrong necessarily here either way at the top. I will say with the playoff success that Joe has had, if you look at his numbers within the playoffs, I think that maybe people are overlooking what Cincinnati's defense did in those playoff stretches. Because Joe's numbers haven't been great. He had the one really good game against Buffalo, but outside of that, the playoff numbers don't necessarily stand out in a big way to me either. I think you could put the numbers, obviously not the record of the games, head to head with Lamar, and it would be interesting to see who comes out on the other side.
Well, the other thing I'll point to as well here is that you're like, okay, Jake Browning and Cincinnati did okay last year, but we've seen Baltimore do pretty well without Lamar, like over many stretches. He's missed a lot of time, and they have not really fallen apart without him in the way that, look, Cincinnati was like a Super Bowl contender last year. And they, they turned out to be an okay team, but not a great one.
Also no Chase for a lot last year, though.
Yeah,
too.
Also no Chase. They were missing T. Higgins for a little stretch as well. So they were pretty banged up all last year. I think the Bengals are going to be a problem again this year. I think they're going to be a really good team. I think if you have Joe Burrow, you feel like you can win. He is that kind of quarterback where you feel like you can win a Super Bowl just because you have him. I think that.
Like, I think that there's a ton of pressure for this to be the year for them, though, too. I mean, probably T. Higgins last year in Cincinnati, that you're running it back for one more year. It almost feels like they're the AFC version of the 49ers to me.
Yeah, I can see that. Is there anyone other than these two that belongs in this conversation? Or is this is at best 1 and 2, but like it's not, it's I can make an argument for Burrow, and I did make an argument for Burrow ahead of Jackson. I could easily make the other argument. I can't make any other argument for anybody else to be in this conversation.
It's not 2020 anymore for me to put Deshaun Watson in the same conversation as those other two. No, I mean, we actually, both of us and collectively, because Derek also had it this way, had Russell Wilson ahead of Deshaun Watson going into this year. I just feel like I feel safer about where Russell is as a player. If you were to ask me which one has a better chance of like blowing up and being incredibly good, I would say it's probably Watson, but like it's a very small percentage compared to the player that we've seen, obviously, since the suspension. So I would have Russell ahead of him going into 2024. That's kind of where I stand with it.
When you're making this prediction here, are you expecting Russell Wilson to be as good as he was last year? Are you thinking he'll be better? Are you thinking he might be a little bit worse? Like, where are you pegging Russell Wilson maybe when you're making this comparison?
I think overall about the same, because I think that it's fair to expect as an aging player, and you look at the skill group and it's not great. But I think the steam and like the strength that it can pull out of it also make up for it. So it's kind of like the steam rising with everything else coming down, and they meet in the middle. And I think that he's just going to be basically the same player. I think you're looking at somewhere between like the 16th to 20th best quarterback in the league, somewhere within there.
Yeah, I think depends on how you count. Like his passer rating was pretty good last year. I expect him to be middle of the road. I would agree with that. And I think that's a pretty safe bet. Like, I understand he's 35. I understand that he's getting older, but like, I don't see deterioration of physical skills to a level that would concern me. There's the occasional person that is in my mentions on Twitter, and usually they're like the Kenny Pickett weirdos that is like insisting that like Russell Wilson is washed. Oh my God, Denver ate the most amount of money to get rid of in NFL history to get rid of him. Like, yeah, the contract was bad. That doesn't mean that he's bad. That just means that they had to eat a lot of money to erase a very large mistake of a contract. That doesn't make him unplayably bad, but it also didn't make any sense for them to pay him even more than that. Like, why would they pay him his salary for this year again on top of all those bonuses? That would be idiotic. Like them cutting him and eating that huge cap hit does not mean that he is he's not good. Like he was fine. You look at the numbers. I mean, it wasn't great, but he's a mediocre quarterback last year, average, middle of the road. And I don't really see why we should not think that he'll be that again.
I firmly agree with that sentiment.
So
we had him above Deshaun Watson.
We both had Deshaun Watson below Russell Wilson. Now, obviously, we know that Deshaun Watson is capable somewhere in his physical self of being better than an average NFL quarterback. He was a borderline MVP candidate in 2020. But I just look at, okay, first of all, the whole year off, that doesn't go well. This is something that you can take in almost any sport. When you have guys in their late 20s missing an entire year, they very rarely come back exactly the same as they were before, especially when you're talking about guys that were at a very high level. Man, like this, the time away from the game, I think, honestly, it's worse than an injury for whatever reason. I don't know why. Like, I look at that and I feel like those guys, like people who, like Vic was never the same when he came back. Like lots of these guys, they might be good, but like if you're expecting them to be the same, that's a fool's errand. And then, yeah, he was rusty when he missed the first 11 games with Cleveland. He comes back for the last 6. He was bad. Like there's no way around it. He was bad. And then last year, yeah, I was kind of playing hurt, but he was bad again. I don't know why. Like that, however much Denver ate to get rid of Russell Wilson and set that record, Cleveland is on track to break it come next March, because like Deshaun Watson has been horrendous the last 2 years. And if he's that again, they're going to have to cut him and need a lot of money too.
I agree. And like you could have, I don't know, maybe before seeing what they were able to do without him, made the case that like, is he going to cost the coaching staff or, front office their jobs? But they like, look at what they were able to do with Flacco last year and still doing that. Like they've shown that they can win with other guys if they just have the right quarterback and like a healthy quarterback in place. So I don't know, like again, having seen Deshaun Watson not be at that level since 2020, it's just hard for me to all of a sudden envision he's going to flip a switch and become that player again. So yeah, I have him 4th out of the 4 projected starting quarterbacks that I have going into 2024.
I really wrestled with putting Justin Fields ahead of him. Now, both of those guys have not been very good the last couple of years. But, man, I look at everything with Fields, and I'm like, okay, he's coming to a new team. He has a really good player ahead of him, so he's going to have to be good to get an opportunity. Like, I don't know. I think there's a lot more reason to have optimism about Justin Fields right now than there is Deshaun Watson. Like, I don't know. I don't know why we think that he's just going to miraculously turn back into the 2020 version of himself when he hasn't been that for 3 years in a row. Justin Fields doesn't have to be that much better than he was to be better. Man, those Chicago teams were grossly incompetent all over the field. I'm not saying that like the Steelers have some future Pro Bowl steal in Justin Fields, but if they can make him 15% better than he was before, then he's better than Deshaun Watson. Now, I don't know if that makes him better than Russell Wilson, and so I don't know if that means he's going to play, but it doesn't take a lot to get him over the hump there.
That's interesting. I mean, that would have been something if you would have ranked him up. I guess for me, it's just like thinking to like, I think only they both could play, but whoever I'm projecting to be the Steelers starting quarterback is the one that I was going to have higher, because there's like no guarantee that we see more than one. So like, what if we don't see much of Fields at all this year anyway? Like, so I don't know. That's ultimately why I came to the decision I did there.
Like, I think there's a good chance that Deshaun Watson could again be just horrendously bad and get himself benched this year. I'm not seeing that at all from Wilson. Like, I don't think he'll be horrendous. Fields, like, even last year was not horrendous. He wasn't good, but he wasn't horrendously bad. Like, he never got himself benched, even though they were going to trade him the following offseason. And so, I don't know. I think if there's a player there that is more likely to just bottom out and be terrible, I think it's Watson.
And speaking of Watson, I had Winston higher than you guys. I had him as the number two out of the group behind Justin Fields. And I wrote in the little blurb why. I mean, if you look at his EPA since coming into the league, it's actually ahead of Russell Wilson, and that time is like right there with the likes of Matt Ryan, Matthew Stafford since he came into the league. Obviously, the variance is crazy. We all know about the 30-30 stuff, but I think at the very least, like you got like a high-end backup with a low-end starter floor. So like I don't know. I think that he's another guy that if he had to play, I'm not saying you're going to get Joe Flacco results, because obviously, you got to have Jameis take care of the ball in that way. But I think he's a guy that could potentially thrive in Stefanski's system when you looked at the system that Jameis has played in and what Stefanski has brought out of other quarterbacks.
Yeah, I went with Jake Browning next. I used him as an example a lot last year, like a guy that obviously didn't have any talent, but was able to just like scheme his way into some decent numbers. But like, I don't know, you do that often enough, and maybe you have something there. I think I probably underrated like how well he did play. The Steelers obviously exposed him pretty badly in that second game, but I mean, if I will say this. It is a steep cliff after Justin Fields. I don't feel good about any of these guys. Yeah. I think Browning, he won some games. He won more games than I expected he would last year. I do like Jameis Winston. I think he's a guy that like, again, like is getting a bit older, hasn't played a lot lately. And I'm not sure if you needed him for like 8 games, how well that would go at this point. Like I'm not sure if I trust him like physically to hold up at this point.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, so based off the player that we had seen in the past is kind of what I was operating under, but you're right. Like we haven't seen much of him lately. So who even knows what it would look like if he had to step into that role. So I don't know. Is there any other quarterbacks that you wanted to touch on? I mean, we're getting down here.
I think we can skip ahead. So the rest of our ranking went, who's next? Tyler Huntley.
Huntley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Kyle Allen and Josh Jack. Was Jackson the last one? Yeah. Who was the last one? Yeah. The Ravens like 38-year-old backup.
Yes. Correct. Yeah, which at that point, like I don't know, not much to say on any of those guys.
Yeah, I agree.
But hey, Kyle Allen did have a little bit of a run with Washington a few years ago. I predicted him when I found out we needed a QB3. I said, just go get Kyle Allen and don't even use a draft pick on one. To me, the running back ones are super interesting, Alan, because we had actually a great bit of difference here. You had Jaylen Warren as your number 1 here. And we all had different because Derek had Derrick Henry and I went with Nick Chubb. So I'll let you kick this off with why Jaylen Warren was your number 1.
Well, he had the best rushing yards over expectation per play of any running back in the division and was like 3rd best in the entire league. And he had the most receiving yards of any running back in the division. He's also a very good blocker. I don't know, like I understand that he didn't have the same number of reps as the rest of these guys, and that he does get a bit of a favorable workload at times. But I think the numbers say he's the best player. Like if I need 8 yards, I want to give the ball to Jaylen Warren. I feel better about him getting 8 yards than anybody else. Like maybe not 1 because he's not the biggest guy, but I just think he's the most productive of these players. And that's what the numbers tell me. Like, and I'm not that's basically the argument for Warren over Harris. Derrick Henry is 30 years old. Father Time is undefeated, and especially against running backs. I'm not a big lover of the Baltimore offensive line right now. I'm not predicting a happy marriage there. Nick Chubb is going to miss maybe not half the season, but he's going to miss some time. If you give me a healthy Nick Chubb, maybe it's different. Mm-hmm. But given where he is in his comeback, it's certainly uncertain what kind of player you're getting on the other side. So give me Jaylen Warren. That's the receiving ability. So he's a true 3-down back. He can play anywhere, and he runs better than everybody else. Like I don't know. It's a running back ranking. I picked the one that runs the best.
I think I should have baked Nick Chubb's injury into this. I said that on this podcast before we even had this conversation talking about when we did the rankings. But I'll bring this up when we talk about the receivers too. This is certainly a case where my guy at the number 4 spot could be the number 1 by the end of the season, because I have Warren all the way down at 4. I really struggled putting Najee in front of him. Ultimately, I probably should have gone with Warren because of the efficiency, but I chose workload over efficiency there. But Nick Chubb, I feel like you mentioned it. Like, if we didn't have the injury to talk about here, I don't know that this is much of a conversation. I mean, you look at the surface level numbers since he came into the league, and he's only 763 yards to move into second all time in franchise history already for them in rushing yards. He's amassed over 6,500 yards and 1,000 receiving yards, 52 touchdowns, 5.3 yards per carry. That's the third highest in the Super Bowl era. Here's a list for you of the running backs that have averaged over 5 yards per carry and have over 1,200 touches. Jim Brown, Barry Sanders, Jamal Charles, Nick Chubb. That's the entire list. So,
Jamal Charles.
Yeah, Jamal Charles
How
might be the
about
one
that
that sticks
one,
out more than Nick Chubb. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was a big Jamal Charles guy, but I was like thrown off when I saw his name kind of thrown in there. Also, like second in cumulative EPA since 2016 behind only Derrick Henry. Keep in mind, Chubb didn't even come into the league until 2018. His rushing yards over expected in that time, 0.9, nearly double that of Christian McCaffrey. So, I mean, the analytics back it up. I just think that what he does in terms of his yards after contact has been second to none. Now, what does the other side of that injury look like? Great question. We don't know, but history not necessarily on his side. I mean, there was some talk like people, when this happened right in front of me at Acrisure Stadium, people were like, that might be his career because he's had multiple devastating knee injuries. So without knowing that information, I put him at number one, but I don't have an issue certainly with any way that you would have ranked these guys. I would have been surprised if any of us had Najee. You had Najee at 2 though, also ahead of Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry.
I did. Mostly because I think, Chubb because of the injury. Henry, 30 years old, man. I got and not, going to a team that has not had a great offensive line, and I don't think got better on the offensive line this offseason. He had a career low in yards per carry last year as it was. I don't know. I see a downward trajectory there that I don't think, is gonna reverse. And Najee Harris has rare running back traits. Hasn't missed a game. Doesn't fumble. He's very reliable. I think they're pretty similar players in a lot of ways. Like just the way they run. I think you can kind of see the through thread between those two guys, but give me the younger one. I mean, I just think that if I have a big question about Derrick Henry, it's can a 30-year-old get through a full season with a worse offensive line than he's probably ever ran behind? I have questions about Najee Harris, but that's not one of them. And so
also switching schemes too. Like, Baltimore runs a lot of gap heavy stuff. He's been in his zone like basically his entire time in Tennessee. So that transition will certainly be interesting. But you mentioned being similar players. I was going to say that too. Like you looked at the way that Derrick Henry's game has aged, at least up till this point. Now, obviously, there's been a little bit of a drop off in terms of efficiency, but I look at Najee pretty similarly. Like I think you're going to see him age in a similar fashion to Derrick Henry, where like he is still productive into his late 20s and early 30s. Obviously, a lot of that's going to be dependent on the offensive line. We don't know where Najee Harris's long-term future is going to be beyond this year. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, certainly within those top 4. We all had the same top 4, just obviously in a little bit different order. And then we all had Zach Moss, the new starting running back in Cincinnati, is the next guy. Actually, really nice year last year in Indianapolis. Got to play quite a bit because of the Jonathan Taylor situation.
Yeah, I remember talking to Landon Roberts before that Colts game, and he's like, that dude runs hard. Like, I don't understand why. I mean, he was like the third running back in like they had somebody else get hurt, or they had a bunch of like he's been bounced around. I think he's an underrated player. And then from there it's a bunch of backups. I don't know that there's anybody that really stands out. Keaton Mitchell was the one that was really difficult to rank.
He had a lot of juice before he got hurt last year.
Yeah, right. Like 8 yards a carry. He had a pretty incredible amount of juice, but it was a small sample. So I think he was really challenging to decipher where you want to put him. I think Chase Brown is a guy, if like you're in a deep fantasy league, man, like snap him up, because I think he showed some stuff down the stretch last year, and I think he's gonna get enough playing time to be a useful player. The rest of these guys, Foreman, Ford, Justice Hill, I don't know. I'm pretty down on him. Like I just think if that ship was going to sail, it would have by now. Who else do we have in there? I think that's about it. Pierre Strong.
I think you ranked Pierre Strong. Yeah.
And you guys had somebody else instead of him. I don't remember who it was. Oh, you had Foreman. Yeah. I didn't even rank him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like you said, when you're getting into that hodgepodge there, who cares who? I mean, basically beyond Zach Moss and the potential of Keaton Mitchell at that point, I don't even care what the rankings were. So, all right. And then getting to receivers, which these are not out on the site yet. So if you guys watch the pod, yeah, you're getting a little bit of an insight here. Alan, Jamar Chase.
Yeah, not a lot of breaking news there.
You have George Pickens as your number 2, which differs from Derek and I. Why do you have George Pickens at number 2?
I have George Pickens number 2 because I think he has that great combination of, like, he was really good last year with really bad quarterback play. Like, I think, Cooper, yeah, he didn't have great quarterback play, certainly. Higgins, we kind of know who T. Higgins is. He's been around long enough that we have a pretty good idea. When I compare George Pickens and what he did last year to the quarterback play he was getting, I think if he doesn't improve at all, if George Pickens has not gotten 1% better than he was last year, and the only improvement comes from a better offensive coordinator and a better quarterback, how much better is George Pickens going to be this year? Like a whole heck of a lot. And then imagine if he gets better. Like, I just think there's a lot of reason to feel like he has more than everybody thinks everybody that was in this offense has more than they to show. And I think that gets like minimized because Pickens was already pretty good, but I don't think it should be. Mm-hmm. Amari Cooper racks up numbers, but he does it sort of uninspiringly to me. Like, he does not scare me as a player, like someone that like defenses really need to focus on. I think that's the other part of this for me, is that you absolutely saw throughout the course of the year, defenses were terrified of George Pickens. They were completely like abandoning their prior defensive scheme, doing stuff they didn't usually do just to find a way to take George Pickens away. I'm not sure I've seen anybody else on this list get that kind of attention.
And if you were to ask me right now, if we were doing like a fantasy draft and going back and forth picking guys, despite the fact that I put him at number 4 right now to start the 2024 season, if we did this back and forth and you took Jamar Chase off the board first, I would take George Pickens second.
Well, isn't that what we're doing? Why did you rank it differently then?
Because I guess I wasn't going into this with where I think they'll be. It's where I would have them ranked right now.
Okay, that's fair.
That's fair. I didn't have as much projection go into my rankings as I probably should have gone in with. And I said the same thing about running backs. That's why, like, I feel like after Jamar Chase, my 2 through 4 could have been in any order and I could have made a justification for it. But to me, George Pickens is the biggest freak out of the 3 behind Jamar Chase. So if I'm starting a franchise right now and picking receivers in the AFC North, George Pickens is my number 2. But for the time being, until I see what he looks like in 2024, I still have him behind the other guys.
I actually think it's pretty close between these 3 guys. Cooper has the numbers. He just does. I don't know, for whatever reason, and maybe it's the scheme, that's fair. But like, I just don't feel like he puts fear in defenses that same way. I think T. Higgins is really hard to evaluate because of playing his whole career, or at least, most of it, kind of in Jamar Chase's shadow as sort of like how good could T. Higgins be as a number 1 receiver is a question that's interesting. And it sure looks like we're going to find out in like a year or 2.
I thought this was going to be the year,
but
2025, I guess.
But I think he's really hard to rank. I really feel confident in Chase, Pickens, Cooper, but like, you could put Higgins ahead of Pickens. And you did, actually. And I think that wouldn't be like, I could have put Higgins anywhere other than first in these first 4. I felt like I had to have Chase first. I had to have Pickens ahead of Cooper, but I didn't know where to put Higgins. Like, I felt like he could have gone anywhere.
I think that there's, I don't know. I'm not going to say that they're 1-for-1, but I think the difference between the guys after Chase, when you look at Pickens and when you look at Higgins compared to Cooper, is just like the physical traits. Like Cooper doesn't have that, and maybe that's what you're talking about. Is like he gets it done in different ways. He's more the route technician. Also, he can line up inside and outside, and that's obviously a plus. But yeah, he doesn't possess that same like physical presence to just go and get the ball, and maybe that's part of the conversation, what you're talking about with him not
Higgins
striking
has
as much
that
fear. That's what I'm saying.
Like
There's probably some, I don't want to say redundancy, but there's some parallels there, sure, between George and T.
I think George and T could be pretty similar players. I'll be honest. Like I don't know. T had a weird year because he didn't have Chase and he didn't have his quarterback, and the numbers were frankly not very good. He was hurt for 4 or 5 games as well. But I think T Higgins is a pretty good player. It's weird because I think I'm higher than like the general consensus on how good T Higgins is, but I also ranked him 4th. I don't know. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I was just saying. I feel like
those two things.
I feel like there was a conversation not that long ago about T Higgins and George that you were a part of. Like having T Higgins above George.
Yeah. I mean, I do. I think they're pretty similar players. I think you can make an argument for T Higgins ahead of George. Absolutely. I think if he had been healthy all year last year, it would have been a little bit easier. And certainly if he had Burrow, then it'd be a lot easier. But I that's tough, man. That's pretty tough. I think they're pretty similar players. I do. I probably should have had Higgins ahead of Cooper. Looking back at it, but Cooper's got the numbers. It's hard to argue with.
Sure. Zay Flowers, number 5 for all of us. Very, very different than the players that we've talked about up to this point. Definitely not the go up and get it jump ball physical presence for the Baltimore Ravens. Gets it done in very different ways. Jerry Jeudy behind him. Obviously, Cleveland just brought him in. Man, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about Jerry Jeudy. I don't think that that's a very good contract by the Browns to hand out. Certainly not as poor.
I was fine with
Deshaun
the
Watson, but
addition. I thought the trade was a good trade, and then the contract.
The trade immediately made me think, oh God, if we trade Deontay Johnson, we're not getting much. And then because they only got a 5th and 6th or something back for him. And then we saw what the Deontay Johnson trade ended up being. Rashad Bateman after him. You had Nelson Aguilar higher than us. Actually, Derek didn't even rank Nelson Aguilar. I had him just 1 spot lower. Jermaine Burton, I had actually Derek and I both had him in the same spot. You had him at 10, but he came in overall as number 8 for us. And Cincinnati's new wide receiver 3 with Tyler Boyd exiting. To me, like Jermaine Burton can play. I think he would have gotten drafted a lot higher if there weren't off-field concerns with him. But I mean, really interesting for a 6'1", 196 guy. I thought he was one of the few like X receivers that was left in the draft after we got out of like round 2. But he still had to wait for his name to be called because of non-football reasons. But
then he's going to get played in the slot. Like that's the one thing that's like a little bit unusual here, right? It's like I think the player's really good. Obviously, there's off the field questions, but the fit is a little bit weird. I don't know. I think he can be really, really good. I'm being a little cautious with ranking him 10th, I think, because I think Aguilar is kind of what he is at this point. And, Elijah Moore is the other guy who I'm actually not a big fan of, but maybe Judy's presence will open some more things up for him underneath.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing with Burton that you just brought up there. Like, I almost wonder, is this more of a pick for 2025 when he's able to be opposite of Jamar Chase without T. Higgins?
Right. Like, I think you're still going to see a lot of Yoshivas and Trenton Irwin this year with Burton maybe more like the replacement for T. Higgins.
Yeah,
I think he's going to be a problem, though. I think if he can keep his head on his shoulders, I think he's going to be a really good player.
Yeah. I mean, he's got all the tools. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Was there anybody else going down the list that you wanted to bring up anything about?
I only ranked one Pittsburgh Steeler. You ranked Calvin Austin.
Yeah, and Derek ranked
Roman Wilson. If I was going to rank another one, it probably would have been Calvin Austin. Are we being too harsh to the Steelers here that we have one of theirs in the top 10?
No, I mean, if full transparency here, probably would not have ranked 2 if it wasn't just like there's got to be somebody else that gets that opportunity, right? Like, so if I'm picking somebody to get it and be able to put somewhat decent numbers up, I think it's Calvin Austin. Like, I'm super interested to see how, Artie uses him and get some free releases. I think it's going to look a lot different. I think that you see a little bit more of an expanded role. I think you have to see more of an expanded role this year. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is more of an indictment to me of anything else of where the Steelers room is at as a whole. But if I'm picking a second guy, it's Calvin Austin over Roman Wilson right now, at least.
All right, just for fun, where would you put Brandon Ayuk and Cortland Sutton?
Ayuk would be 2 for me, just behind Jamar Chase.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Cortland Sutton.
I would put Cortland Sutton 5.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm like right there with Zay Flowers, but I lean Sutton.
Yeah, yeah. I think Sutton can do more.
He's above Judy, so it's like
I think Sutton can do more than Flowers. Flowers is like just a slot guy.
So, yeah, I would say 2 and then 5. 2 and 5.
Is there anybody else that we've talked about the Steelers acquiring that would make this list?
I mean,
does Treylon Burks make this list?
That's the name that I thought of. That's like right there. I mean, if you're putting,
I don't think so.
It would be the same reasoning that I put Calvin Austin, right? Like, it's just you feel like whoever's a second receiver on the Steelers is going to have the opportunity to be one of the 10 best. I don't know.
Yeah,
probably not. He's probably not in the top 10.
So we ranked the Steelers as having the 3rd best quarterback, the 3rd best running back, and the 3rd best wide receiver. Do you think that's fair? Like, looking at it that way, are you on board with that?
So the thing with the 3rd best running back, though, is as a tandem, far and away to me the best.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, but receiver, probably 4th as a room.
Yeah.
So even though it kind of balances
quarterback,
out.
like the backup doesn't really matter that much. Like, I'm not giving Steelers any credit for having the best backup quarterback, but I agree that I think they have the best running backs and the worst wide receivers.
Yeah. So the reason that I say that is because I like on the surface, if you just hear 3rd running back, I don't know that does justice the actual duo that they have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, you look at the rooms that they have. Sure.
3rd quarterbacks, 4th wide receivers, best running backs. I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
Let me know what you think. I think this is an interesting topic of conversation. Obviously, there's going to be a lot to lot between now and the season, but yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty good look at it.
I know Pat's chomping at the bit for those tight end rankings. So when we get there.
Ooh, where's he?
I know. Yeah. Well, sorry, Pat. Mark Andrews is going to be number 1, but we'll see beyond there where the conversation starts. Anyways, I'm curious. Yeah, the people that watch or listen to the show, what you guys think about the rankings and where you would rank the position groups here. So let us know how you rank your top 10s. Even if you literally in the comments of this YouTube video want to type out 1 through 10 of each of these, we'd love that. We'll certainly go through them. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. Alan, tell the people where they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH, Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. Like and subscribe to YouTube channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Find us on TikTok, Steelers Afternoon Drive. I think that's it.
There we go. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you were listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You find Steelers Afternoon Drive there and do that so you get a notification when a new episode is posted. Follow me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. For Alan Saunders and myself, thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.